In the summer of 2006, Mark Rutherford, a seasoned Alaska wilderness guide, and R.A. Beattie, Colorado-based guide and filmmaker, embarked on an epic journey. Their goal? The first recorded descent of an unnamed tributary of the Nushagak River in Bristol Bay, Alaska. The two-man team encountered countless setbacks, but in the end, completed a successful first descent. A year later, inspired by the prior adventure, they returned to the river with a larger group to retrace their steps. This is their story. It's July in the small fishing town of Dillingham in southwest Alaska. If there's a list of last frontier towns in America, this is at the top of that list. And on the outskirts of town, Mark Rutherford and R.A. Beattie are testing and weighing all of their gear. Exactly a year ago, they were going through the same process as they prepared to attempt the first recorded descent of a tributary of the upper Nushagak. They'll have a little over a week to weigh, test, and repair all the gear before the rest of the group arrives.
So we're in Dillingham, Alaska, and we're going through all the gear. We're weighing everything. We're making sure everything is going to be set for the next adventure.
All of the equipment appears to be in perfect shape, and feeling confident that everything is in order, they decide to use the remaining time to explore a nearby fishery. After examining their options, they plan to land at a glacial lake and run the creek that flows from it, which is a small tributary of the Good News River. All in all, they'll need to cover about 60 miles in 4 days.
As we're flying in over this incredible treeless tundra, we're going up this gently sloping terrain, which then becomes a canyon and then becomes a fjord lake.
Mark was pretty adamant that this lake had some of the best lake trout fishing he'd ever seen. I was excited for the fishing, but I was also, really excited just to get back to the bush. The whole experience of going someplace where I've never been, and I know that very few people have ever been, it was incredibly thrilling. I think it's what most anglers dream about.
I'd been flying over this river on my way other places for years, and I would look at it and I would think, gosh, that looks a little gnarly, but I think a guy could get through there in a small raft.
Going to this watershed, I was confident the fishing would be great. Traveling with Mark over the last few years, the fishing's always been amazing. It's typically the getting in or getting out that's a little bit more of a challenge.
Incredible pods of lake trout. These lake trout would spread out over these flats, and in particular right where the inlet creek came in. And the sockeye fry are coming down the inlet creek. They've just hatched a month or so ago and entering the lake where these lake trout, are gorging on them.
The lake trout fishing on that glacial lake was easy. I don't think those fish had eaten in months. They were starving.
And that's what it was like the first time I was here. And I thought, this is going to be great. R.A. will love catching lake trout on a fly. What I didn't know is that when we were fishing the inlet, we would catch these beautiful Arctic char.
One of the problems with being on a tight schedule in Alaska is that you constantly encounter the best fishing of your life, and then you have to keep moving.
In order to reach the rendezvous point on time, the guys must cross the glacial lake and begin the slow descent down the creek.
The first couple miles of that creek were brutal. I mean, so shallow, just barely enough water to get the boat through.
So what we worked out to get down this really shallow, rocky creek was that one person would walk ahead and fish. The other person would stay with the boat and slowly line it down through the boulder gardens, dragging it a little bit, picking it up when you had to, portaging it when you had to, and that person would just follow the fisherman.
I'd say the fishing on the creek was decent. We were probably there a little too early. I'm sure that when more fish move through the system, it picks up a bit.
As most anglers know, in this ecosystem, everything revolves around the salmon.
As anglers up in Alaska, we're typically looking for watersheds with high numbers of salmon, because with those salmon come high numbers of grayling, high numbers of dollies and char, and the top predator, which I think everybody is after up there, big, wild rainbow trout.
It didn't take long for Mark and RA to realize that this fishery was not the rainbow trout mecca they had hoped for. So they continued their descent, finally reaching their rendezvous point, tired but right on schedule.
In 2006, it wasn't pretty, but we succeeded in making the first descent of this unnamed tributary of the upper Nushagak River.
I think the scariest part of that first descent trip for me was dealing with the unknown. Obviously, in this day and age, there are very few places that are left untouched.
For such a well-known fishery, the Nushagak, one of the great rivers of the world, there is a reason when you find a tributary, or even, this secondary little creek off of a tributary, that people don't go to.
Something was keeping people out of this watershed, and it turned out that it was two things. But the first thing was access to the headwaters.
We did the aerial reconnaissance, shot aerial photography, figured out how we could portage from this little teeny lake way off in the tundra to this boreal forest river over here. Worked out this complex portage route.
Prior to this trip, I'd spent my entire life in the outdoors, quite a bit of time in Alaska, and I thought I was in pretty decent shape, and it turns out that I was wrong.
The trip was very tough. The toughest part of it was the initial portage in. It took us 12 hours to get a quarter mile with 496 pounds. What would that take? At home in your garage, 20 minutes? Just pick up the bags, move them. We would have these boats on our back or packs on our back, and we started off walking through this sphagnum bog, this peat bog next to the lake we'd landed. And you'd take a step and you'd feel like this magic carpet undulating under your feet.
So that was the first major obstacle, portage from hell. Worst portage of my life. I swore I'd never do anything like that ever again. Didn't matter how good the fishing was. I didn't really care what was on the other side. The mosquitoes were so bad, you couldn't even open your mouth to breathe. You had to breathe through your nose or you'd suck like 10 of them in.
Your hands are occupied. The worst mosquitoes of 30 seasons in Alaska. Now, having said that, that was the worst portage of my life. Sort of the second layer of difficulty was this succession of log jams down the river and fallen spruce trees obscuring the channel. And that led up to this huge log jam that we would have to get through.
So we knew about most of the log jams from our air recon, and we were confident that if we took our time, we could get over anything. But having not really done anything like this before, I was really nervous the entire trip, especially because there's only two of us. And when we did that initial first descent, I didn't even know Mark. We talked on the phone a few times, and he said, listen, I explore these remote rivers in Alaska, and I think it'd be an incredible filming opportunity. And obviously he was right, because here we are going back to do it again.
My name's Kate Rutherford, daughter of Mark Rutherford. I grew up here in Alaska, sort of the opposite side of Alaska in the interior, close to Tok Junction, and moved up here at about 6 months with my folks, and they called it whaling through the wilderness.
My name's Mike Schaefer. I'm from Tacoma, Washington originally, live in Yosemite Valley.
We would be in these canoes going back and forth to this cabin we were building, and I think I threw almost every single little rattle toy I had overboard into the muddy Tananon.
My name is Mike Cuzio. I'm from the Roaring Fork Valley of Colorado, and I'm a ski filmmaker. I spend most of my time skiing, filming skiing, watching planes land.
Not much of a fisherman, but I'm here as a still photographer.
I've never been to Alaska before, and my first 24 hours here have been pretty interesting.
Grew up in a little cabin in the woods, picking ice out of the spring to haul water back to the house with my mom. And
I feel really fortunate to go on a trip like this as a rookie. My brother's a fly fishing guide, and he's gonna kill me after this trip, I think, because I get to go and he didn't.
I think it was pretty harsh on my folks. They were I think they were tired.
Been told of gigantic log jams, epic portages carrying all the equipment over really uneven terrain, and
Yeah, the porridge. I've heard about the porridge, and I gotta think it can't be anything worse than I've dealt with.
when I think of Alaska, I think of the bush. I think of large tracts of remote, totally untamed wilderness. This state and this entire geography is way larger than anything I've been accustomed to. And coming to a place like this where the valleys are so wide and the rivers themselves meander through these gigantic valleys, the tundra and the marsh and the trees all kind of coalesce in this really gigantic, untamed form of wilderness that, we're not used to in the lower 48 is really exciting to me.
It was so surreal. Return to that river, just being at the landing pond, and it was bittersweet. Swore I'd never do that portage again, and I was glad to be back. For me, the most intense moment is watching that plane disappear off into the distance, and when the drone of the engine finally fades, and that's when you know that you are truly alone.
What was really fantastic the second year, is we've got 4 people under the age of 30, and they are getting it done.
Walking across this sphagnum moss floating carpet of grass is pretty crazy. It's like walking on a waterbed.
That portage was so much easier the second time. It took the better part of the day, but knowing the route and having a huge crew and people to carry stuff, it wasn't that bad. Not quite like the first year.
Thinking about the Bristol Bay fishery and, more specifically the northern half of the Bristol Bay, the Nushagak District fishery. This is a world-class salmon fishery. The Nushagak River would always be on a list of the 10 world's greatest salmon rivers. Some years it's number 1 for king salmon, some years it's number 4 for sockeye. But when you're getting millions of fish returning to a river, this is a good thing.
When we did this river the first time, Mark explained to me that he thought this river would be an epic fishery. He also explained this, while we were performing the portage, and he said he thought this would be an epic fishery, but he wanted me to know that there was a possibility that it could be a bust, which isn't exactly what you want to hear in the middle of a 12-hour portage.
We get to the edge of the river, look at it, and it looked like a Upper Peninsula Michigan brook trout stream. It's like this tea-colored tannin water, that that was not a classic salmon stream.
He'd fished the headwaters of this river and said that it fished amazing. So he was pretty confident, but he said, if the salmon aren't there, then it's probably going to be a grayling trip, which wouldn't have been as much fun.
We hadn't been there very long before a pair of chum salmon swam by. We got on the river, we got in the boat, but we are passing salmon. And both of us looked at each other and said, oh man, we're in the game now.
I think it was pretty clear, even from the very beginning, the first few miles, that we had stumbled upon something pretty amazing. With the portage out of the way, there was this huge weight lifted. Well, once you make it to the river, you're on river time. I think that's the coolest thing about river trips. You sink deeper and deeper into this river mode, which is this very basic routine of waking up in the morning, packing camp, spending the entire day cruising around, fishing, exploring. Then towards the end of the day, it's all about finding a good camp and then, setting up camp, getting the kitchen ready, eating and drinking and telling stories and just basically slipping away from the realities of everyday life. And then you get to wake up and do it all over again. There's something profoundly rewarding in that escape. I think the most rewarding part of the trip was being able to share the fishery with our group, especially because we had Mikey Schaefer and Mikey Cuzio, who are novice fly fishermen, and just to watch these two learn in the most rewarding environment I could imagine was awesome. Mikey Schaefer picked it up pretty quick. Taught him the basics of the cast and mending, and he had it down pretty fast. That Mike Cuzio, on the other hand, is a piece of work, man. When we're fishing in Alaska, we're typically trying to find big rainbow trout. That's what we're there for. Every now and then, you happen to catch a salmon. Now, Mike Cuzio was hell-bent on catching a chum. Even though we all explained to him every day that you're not really trying to catch chums. You're trying to catch rainbow trout or, maybe another species. And that's the only fish he wanted. And meanwhile, he's landing dollies and grayling and rainbow trout. And that's the great thing about Cuzio. He's just endless entertainment. And on top of that, he's incredibly accomplished in the outdoors and just an incredible filmer and just all around amazing guy to have around in any situation.
Just rowing the boat, enjoying my rowing zen.
What was really cool to watch was Mark and Kate when they had a chance to fish together. Here you have a father and a daughter, 2 seasoned guides. They spend the majority of their summer taking people down the river, probably never get to fish together, on the water, free to do whatever they want to do, and getting after it.
I just have to say, as a father, that I'm just really humbled and just really proud to do this kind of thing with my daughter Kate. She is a remarkably accomplished outdoors person. What I struggle at and what many people struggle at, the various skills that you develop along the way, map reading, route finding, meal preparation, she just gets.
Time to let the fire burn. Keep the water, just make it harder and let it burn. Just let it burn, gotta let it. I've been lost, I'm taking a walk. I told myself to just keep walking away. But the friends that I made, no one is the same. And there's something to say about the sun and the rain. I spoke with Ho Chi Minh, he said he was dreaming of peace. Yeah, brighter than the flowers, taller than the towers, like the mountain of bones that drop me down to my knees and wipe me.
I feel like it's cheating when I get to go fishing with my dad and be in his boat. It makes everything a million times easier. Him rowing the boat for me was special. Like, I don't get to do that very often. Usually I'm working, I got my own boat, my own clients. I can follow him, and that, that's great.
The water will make you harder and let it burn.
She caught the largest rainbow of her life, full on, just a great fish.
Having a great net man is helpful too.
What I noticed coming out of my mouth while my daughter is playing this huge fish is all these do's and don'ts, like, no, keep the line a little, keep it just right, 10th, no, not that, oh, when we land it, you gotta do this. It was like unbelievable. I got all this stress, and it was so important.
Really, really beautiful fish. Really tall, really deep. Get to share that with my dad. It doesn't happen very often. I see him a handful of times a year, so super exciting day for me. Bigger fish in my life, probably. It wasn't that long, but he was really tall.
But in spite of my advice, she landed, truly a grand fish. And I love that, and I love it that she took the time out to spend with me, doing my passion. Can you imagine me taking the week out to go climb El Cap? It would be tough, but I would do it.
On the first ascent trip, we knew about the massive log jam. We saw it from the air, but we didn't really know exactly where it was or what day we'd encounter it.
And this is what I'd been thinking about for a couple of years. How are we going to get this raft, all this film equipment, over what amounts to, a couple acres of jackstrawed, old-growth white spruce? It's been there for hundreds of years. It's all anchored in sand, and channels have cut around one side, another, gone over the top. And I have worried about this for a while.
That first year, it took a great deal of time to get through that log jam, because you have to be extremely careful, A, not to damage your gear, and B, not to hurt yourself.
It was actually as tough as I thought it was going to be.
But what we noticed when we were climbing through all this debris was an incredible amount of life. We noticed these grayling and even giant rainbow trout living within this woody debris, feeding on smolts and insects, and all this life that was living inside of the jam. What we found was by far the highest concentration of life anywhere on the river. And as a result, it was some of the best fishing that we had that first year. So that second year, we're actually eager to get back to the log jam, and spend some time there.
We've still got a lot of equipment. We got people in motion. And what you worry about is somebody dropping a leg down into these logs where you got to load on your back and breaking a leg. You're walking, sometimes it's like kind of tightrope walking. You're walking the top of a log, balancing this stuff. You hope you make it through. And in spite of the fact that we had a really solid team the second year, the risk was there. I mean, if one person had blown out a knee, the trip would turn into a medevac. It would not be a fishing trip anymore. I now view those log jams, small ones, single log across a channel, to very complex big ones, as the single most important part of the in-river rearing habitat. This is where all those salmon fry are hiding from predation. The terns are coming at them from above, the char and rainbow from below, and they need these log jams, and they need the root wads that are along the bank. And honestly, my life as a guide is much easier if these log jams have a channel cut through or are moved. And throughout history in Alaska and the rest of the country, we've cleared channels for navigation. And I understand that it makes our lives a lot easier. But what's changed now is I believe we have to leave those in place.
It's not for me to say there's a right or the wrong way to travel on the river. All I know is that the thick wooden debris that makes upstream navigation really difficult or sometimes impossible is some of the most important habitat in these rivers.
After passing over the massive log jam, the crew has one more day on the river before reaching the confluence and their pickup point. Although they're technically back in charted waters, they're still very much in the wild. And the lower reaches of the river offer a different opportunity for the anglers.
So the first year we stumbled upon these sloughs in the lower river. And while they were somewhat of a mosquito hatchery, it just so happened that they were full of northern pike.
Eventually, the group rounds what will be the last bend in their journey. They cherish the last few moments on the unnamed river. Then the waters collide, swirl, and eventually become one.
It always amazes me how fast these trips go. It's always hard to leave. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. No question. Go back anytime.
You know, we've been asked by people who've heard this story or heard parts of this story, and was it worth it to suffer and, carry all this stuff and deal with the grizzly bears and the log jams and all the things you do in a day? I don't know if it's worth it, but to me, it's what I go to bed at night in my other life, real life, my home life. I go to bed thinking about these places. I wake up in the morning and I think, in only 100 more days, I'm going to be exploring a creek that I believe has never been explored before.